Hey everybody, it's Carm here, and you know who? Been a little while since he's appeared, the director. Yeah, we're just kind of hanging out here on a rather wet and chilly Saturday afternoon. Wanted to come on and talk about another artist, actually a set of artists that I guess in some ways is kind of a continuation of the Danny Hines feature, at least stylistically, and well, as with a lot of things I'll talk about in the feature, came through WNUA and or Starstreams, or just part of that time from way back when. And the group is Special Effects, made up primarily, the core members are George Jinda on various percussion, and Kelly Minucci on a variety of guitars, electric and acoustic, guitar synthesizer. George was born in 1941 in Hungary, and I believe Kelly's from New York, born 1958. So two generations there of artists. And throughout the years together, they played with really a rotating cast of all kinds of musicians, wonderful players from just different areas of jazz, and even outside there, composition and session players. But it was primarily them, at least up until the mid '90s. It was them as the core, and mainly focusing on the early stuff, since that's what I pretty much have. There was a point in the mid '90s where they took a stylistically quite a different turn, which I personally, it's not quite my taste as much, but say just focusing more on the early stuff, which is kind of for me has always been the core. Yeah, I'd first heard them probably as far back as the late '80s on WNUA. One of those things where you hear all these different songs, and they got a lot of airplay on that station, and it took over the course of a few years to finally kind of make the connection where these came from, and eventually got into the albums. But it was Gary, good pal Gary, Cosmic Pickle, who made a wonderful comprehensive overview video of theirs some years ago. Kind of sparked me to investigate them further and just connect further dots, and I've become quite a big fan. So it's partially dedicated to Gary, and this will just be more of kind of scratching the surface of them overall. But starting in, it's their first album from 1984, self-titled, although originally it was called Special Delivery on the Ketone Records label. This is a GRP reissue. And on here you have players such as Fernando Saunders, Steve Robbins, as well as, of course, Kelly and George. And right away, you could kind of hear they had a real signature sound, I feel. I always say, I appreciate music where you really have a hard time categorizing it. They were often billed throughout the years, well, I guess because they were playing on what's known as smooth jazz radio, as a smooth jazz group, although I think there's so much more to it than that. Again, kind of fitting in between the cracks of what can be considered, I call it, categorically ambiguous, where they're just, in a way you really don't know what to call them. They're kind of all these things and none of these things, in a sense. Jazz, rock, world music, and a lot of things in between. But you could hear kind of that on here, as well as, the kind of the formative sound of a group just starting out. It's kind of funky, kind of a funky fusion at times, but also gets into more acoustic, even kind of a bucolic sound. And a piece on here in particular called "The Slug" makes me think of kind of like an '80s cop show, or even like a movie, maybe like a B movie. But it's definitely kind of, some kind of a detective drama with a little bit of a little humor injected in there. Just the way the bass is approached and just the rhythm. It's very much like an urban landscape, but done through that kind of You know, it just has a certain almost animated feel to it, which I really, really enjoy. And again, you can kind of hear the seeds of what was later to come, which had, a distinctive sound that was really between the two of them, George and Kelly. Again, with all the others, the rotation of so many other great musicians. But a really nice debut here. Again, we can kind of hear where they're, soon to go. And next up, from 1985, Modern Manners. With them there. And on here, you could kind of hear them go a little bit more into more of a signature sound. Very melodic, very evocative with the melodies. And George's percussion is, as much as rhythmic, it's also textural, and he really approaches it quite painterly. I think they kind of play their respective instruments sort of like the other one does, if that makes sense. Kelly is very melodic, and has as much to do with texture and thinking in kind of a painterly terms of colors, of mixing colors and texture. And George has that sense too of also telling a story through his percussion. And on here, it's speaking of the first album having kind of like an urban landscape feel to it, this almost is like an urban landscape but seen through like a rural lens, if that makes sense. Like it's urban, but it's kind of atmospheric urban, like almost seen through like a dream in a way. Maybe even a little bit like the cover, where you have these objects almost kind of incongruously placed within the landscape. So the music kind of has that feel to it. Both impressionistic and funky. So it just has it's just a really nice blend of maybe different aspects you wouldn't quite think to put together. And again, it goes so far beyond what could be called a smooth jazz format or like a radio friendly format. A little bit of that on the surface, but it goes deeper on further listenings. But yeah, this is really when they kind of come into that what could be called their signature sound. Just beautiful stuff. Yeah, Modern Manners from 1985. And next up, yeah, a lot of these are pretty much clustered in one era. Slice of Life from 86. This album is really mood-wise even more joyous and celebratory and quite upbeat for the most part. Uptown East is just very has a kind of exuberance to it, just the way they kind of play off of each other. And there's a lot of as with the previous one, there's a lot of notable guest musicians. Jeff Andrews and Mark Egan on basses at various times, Dennis Chambers and Dave Wuckel on drums, Alan Smallwood on keyboards. Yeah, I think some of these same players are on the previous album. So really, yeah, wonderful interplay between everyone, and kind of, again, sitting in between styles. Another piece on here called Formal Invitation has to be one of my favorites, probably in the whole catalog that I've heard. It has almost kind of a progressive rock feel to it almost. Just something about their, there's a certain intense thrust to it. It's not grandiose, but it just, the way it comes in, they're a little, the way they harmonize with each other, just really kind of has that feel to it. And there they are at the time. Yeah, Slice of Life. If this is really, if you really want to get a little pep, this is a good album for that. Whereas I think the previous one kind of had more of a mixture of moods, but this one for the most part is very perfect for this time of year as we're coming, right into spring. We're kind of a feeling of awakening with this. So yeah, you have Slice of Life from 86. Next, here we're coming up on what I think is still a mutual favorite of both Gary and I. And this is probably my introduction to them as far as the music I heard of theirs. From 1987, Mystique. Some kitty eyes here. And this one is rather more comparatively subdued, but still has a a real kind of sense of celebration and wonder to the music. Starting with Hands of the Healer, which is absolutely gorgeous. I mean, it's so evocative and so in and of itself, it's such a deep landscape. Just very exploratory, more synthesizer oriented on here overall, without necessarily being like an electronic album, but as far as the textures are concerned. Also, you have the theme of various cats, which I'm rather partial towards. And on here you have a player called Sashi, which Gary touched on a good deal in his own video. He's a piano player who's also Hungarian, like George Jinda, and Jeff Andrews on bass, Dave Weckel drums, some of the previous players, and you have a couple of different keyboard players. But on here overall, the album is a more subdued mood, more reflective. Also a piece called Rainy Sunday, just well, it's perfect for now. And yeah, overall it's a nice mixture of moods, but just a little more contemplative. This would be something, if you're going to listen to these in a row, it'd be good to kind of wind down from the previous one, and then prepare yourself for whatever comes next. But this yeah, any of these I think would be a good place to start with them, but this would be, is my personal introduction, and yeah, it's one I keep coming back to. So yeah, this one's absolutely gorgeous. Mystique from 1987. And finally here, jumping ahead a few years to 1992, we have Global Village. Now this one is kind of getting back into kind of a higher energy, again, that real exuberance. Really, I'd say, as far as I could remember, probably the closest thing they really got to traditional jazz, but even still, very modern, like a modern jazzier approach. And they added some saxophone on here too, from Bob Mintzer from the Yellow Jackets. So you could hear even more of that influence in here. Even more percussion based, a lot more overlaying of his percussion and rhythmic interplay overall. But this one's just, I would even say, riveting at times. Just the way they the energy is so high on here. It's intense without being overwhelming, or it's not bombastic, but it just, I don't know, it's hard not to be uplifted when hearing this. At least for me personally, if I ever need a good just a good boost of joy, this album really does it. And yeah, something Gary pointed out, on most of their albums that they played on together, they would have at least one cut where it would just be the two of them, various percussion and guitars. I don't even think they ever did that for an entire album, but on this album there's actually several pieces, I think 3 songs, where they play just the two of them, and so you could really hear the two of them kind of stretch out together. And it would have been nice to hear more of that, but even still. So as far as mood, variety, pacing, this one is really, but again, being very, very upbeat, and especially right in with the first 2 pieces. I mean, you're just, I don't know, I find it, if you're in a, not in the best of moods, it could always give you a nice lift. So and also on here there's some wordless vocals, which I must be partial towards that sort of thing. If I like my vocals, I like them, I tend to like them as an instrument. But Mark Ledford is on here, who sang with the Pat Metheny group for some time, and I think more than any other album, this definitely has a Pat Metheny group, if not an influence, definitely kind of a crossing over similarity with having him on there. but even compositionally and as far as the scope of the music, it really kind of has that feel of a Pat Metheny album of that time, you know, late 80s, early 90s. But yeah, this is just wonderful. This would be a really nice introduction to them too. And again, for that extra pep. So yeah, Global Village from 1992. And yeah, that's what I have for these. As far as I know understand, by the mid 90s, the sound of the group started changing towards something a bit more, for lack of a better word, radio friendly, or maybe a little more programmatic, which for my own taste personally, not into quite as much. Maybe like adding more dance beats, a little more influence of say both hip hop and techno, maybe in more subtler ways. So anything from like 94 onwards, I think, kind of reflects that a little bit more. And if you're interested in that, you know, maybe look more into those albums. I never really explored them quite as much as these, so I don't know. I'm just partial towards this style. But yeah, would definitely recommend any of these, you know, for starters, if you just want to get into this kind of, you know, this area of music making, that again kind of sits in between, you know, various styles, and yeah, just enjoying it very much. Oh, before I forget, I can hear in the background, I've got it kind of low. This is a wonderful side project of George Jinda, who sadly he passed on way too young. I think in the early 2000s. I think it was complications of a stroke or something related to that, and he was unable to play. But in the early 90s, this is from 92, I think. Yeah, it's from 92. George Jinda and World News. Something I learned directly from Gary about. He's joined on here by Sashi, piano, Randy Ruse on guitars and guitar synthesizers, and Gerald Beasley on bass. And as a side project where he did a couple albums with them. I like this stuff just about every bit as much as the special effects, actually. Sometimes even a little more so. Even going in other directions, maybe a little more experimental. You know, a little more complex. But yeah, I'd recommend this very much too. So yeah, little special effects on a Saturday. It's been wanting to talk about them for a while, and be getting around to revisiting them further, and yeah. So I hope you enjoy anything you explore of theirs. And as ever, I'll leave some songs in the notes below, and yeah, see what you think. So I hope you're all doing well. Thank you for watching. From the snoozing director and I, well, to the next one. Peace, love, and joy.